right, welcome everyone. I'm Sophie Hogeveen, Data Access Officer for the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging, or the CLSA. Thank you for joining us for this CLSA webinar. Arthritis is associated with high nutritional risk, insights from the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the CLSA National Coordinating Center and McMaster University are located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. We would like to acknowledge that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of Théa or Montreal, the lands and waters on which we gather today. Université de Montréal acknowledges that it is located on Indigenous territory that has not been ceded by treaty and wishes to salute those who, since time immemorial, have been its traditional custodians. It expresses its respect for the contributions of Indigenous peoples to the culture of societies here and around the world. As attendees of the webinar, I encourage you to continue your learning by following the webinar and to acknowledge the original inhabitants of the land where we currently have the privilege to research, live, and work, wherever that may be. Excuse me. Before we begin, let's review a couple of housekeeping points. Everyone but the presenters will be muted throughout the webinar. If you need to change or test your audio during the webinar, you can click Audio Settings on the bottom of the Zoom window. At the end of today's presentation, we'll have a question and answer session. So if you have a question for the presenter during the webinar, you can post it in the Q&A box located in the bottom toolbar. The questions will be addressed at the very end of the webinar, and these questions will be visible to all of the attendees. If you have any technical trouble concerning the webinar, please use the chat box to communicate with the webinar team. A feedback survey will be launched at the end of the webinar, and we invite you to complete it after you exit the Zoom session. The brief survey provides us with important feedback that we can use to plan future CLSA webinars. Now, today's webinar is titled Arthritis is Associated with High Nutritional Risk. Insights from the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging. This webinar will be presented by Dr. Lisa Kakinami, Associate Professor in the Department of Health, Kinesiology and Applied Physiology at Concordia University, as well as Roxanne Bennett, National Nutrition Program Manager, Dairy Farmers of Canada, and Théa Demmers, PhD candidate at École de santé publique, Université de Montréal. Dr. Lisa Kakinami has an undergraduate degree in psychology from UCLA and a PhD in epidemiology from the University of Rochester. A native Californian, Dr. Kakinami moved to Montreal in 2010 for a postdoctoral fellowship at McGill University and has been a faculty member in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics at Concordia University since 2014. Her research focuses on understanding the relationship between lifestyle factors, adiposity, and chronic diseases. Théa Demmers grew up on a farm, reaping harvests on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. However, Montreal, located on unceded lands and waters stewarded by the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, has been home since 2002. She's a dietitian nutritionist and graduate of Messiah and McGill universities. Since 2004, she has been a part of projects about food security and has worked alongside mothers, teens, adults, and athletes with nutrition counseling and workshops, often with cooking, at various community organizations, and as a research professional and instructor at Concordia University. She loves getting to work with students and will always be one. She is currently a PhD candidate at l'École de santé publique, Université de Montréal. Roxanne Bennett is a registered dietitian born and raised in Montreal, Théa, where she still resides. Passionate about the health sciences, she graduated from the dietetics program at Université de Montréal in 2016 and went on to complete an applied master's degree at McGill University's School of Human Nutrition in 2018, with a focus on public health. She currently works as a registered dietitian for the Dairy Farmers of Canada. Her interests span the full spectrum of nutrition, from the molecular mechanisms that shape health to broader trends in population nutrition. Welcome to all of you, and I'll turn it over to our presenters.
All right, so maybe we can get started. Thank you everyone in attendance. So as mentioned, our presentation is called Arthritis is Associated with High Nutritional Risk Among Older Canadian Adults, Insights from the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging. So before we dive into the bulk of our study, I just wanted to touch on arthritis very briefly. So arthritis is a leading cause of disability, and its impact continues to grow with aging populations. Now, some may think of arthritis as one specific condition, but rather it's a category of conditions that share the common symptoms of inflammation, pain, and/or stiffness in one or more joints. And in fact, there are over 100 different types of arthritis, each having its own underlying cause, pathophysiology, and range of symptoms, making diagnosis and management highly individualized. Importantly, there's no known cure for arthritis as of now. However, treatments which can include medication, surgery, or a variety of lifestyle interventions can be used to help to control symptoms, prevent complications, and help maintain mobility. In some cases, particularly with more autoimmune forms, remission can be achieved, which allows for periods without active symptoms. But still, for many people, arthritis remains a chronic and progressive condition that requires ongoing management and continues to pose significant challenges to daily life. So the two most common types of arthritis are osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis. Now, I also wanted to briefly touch on comparing the two, quickly to really illustrate how arthritis can vary widely in its causes, symptoms, and patterns of joint involvement. So, for example, osteoarthritis has been traditionally described as a wear and tear condition, which means that it involves the gradual breakdown of cartilage and joints over time. Now, that being said, I would like to mention that some newer research does show low-grade local inflammation can contribute to symptoms and progression, though it is different still from the more systemic inflammation in autoimmune arthritis. So back to rheumatoid arthritis, that's more of an autoimmune disease where the immune system mistakenly attacks the joints. And now let's consider onset in age. So osteoarthritis is most common with older adults, often after the age of 50, because of its more biomechanical wear and tear component. On the other hand, rheumatoid arthritis can occur at any age, but it's most frequently diagnosed between the ages of 40 and 60. In terms of symptoms, both share pain, stiffness, swelling, which can reduce range of motion, but there are a few key differences. So among them, osteoarthritis can impact just one joint. On the other hand, rheumatoid arthritis usually develops in more of a symmetrical pattern. So that means both knees, both wrists, and does tend to spread to multiple joints over time. And rheumatoid arthritis also involves systemic symptoms, which are very important to consider. So like fatigue, fever, or decreased appetite, which is not something you would typically see in osteoarthritis. And finally, looking at the prevalence in Canada, osteoarthritis impacts about 15% of adults over the age of 20, and more specifically, roughly 18% of women and 11% of men. On the other hand, rheumatoid arthritis is less common, affecting about 1.2% of adults, 1.7% of women, and 0.8% of men. Now, as you know, the discussion today will focus on nutrition and arthritis, so we wanted to really visualize the relationships here. And what's important to recognize, and I hope is reflected in this graph, is that these relationships are often bidirectional. So first, let's talk about diet influencing arthritis. Now, this is an emerging field. Research is exploring how certain dietary patterns or food may act as a complementary lifestyle approach to help reduce symptoms and improve clinical outcomes. But the reverse is also true. Arthritis can impact diet and nutrition. We know arthritis causes pain and fatigue, and it is known to reduce function, which could make it harder to do important things like shop, cook, or eat. And that can potentially affect nutritional status and increase the risk of malnutrition. Now, of course, adding to this complexity, these relationships can differ depending on the type of arthritis, how severe it is, which joints are affected, as well as other personal and environmental factors. But ultimately, this relationship between diet and arthritis and how functional impairment comes into play is not very well understood. In contrast, the relationship between arthritis and functional impairment is quite well established. Joint pain, stiffness, and fatigue can significantly affect an individual's ability to function. And in fact, more recent studies since the publication of our work identified that people with arthritis are up to 2.5 times more likely to experience difficulties with daily and household activities compared to those who don't have arthritis. And 36% of one of the study's participants with osteoarthritis and rheumatoid or rheumatoid arthritis had activity limitations and participation restriction. However, once again, the downstream impacts of this relationship on dietary habits and nutrition is not well documented. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's dive into this relationship between functional impairment and nutritional risk. So past research suggests that nutritional risk, which we'll discuss at length in the next slide, but it means the risk of malnutrition, that it may be linked to functional impairment. In people with arthritis, higher disease activity and greater disability often make it harder to carry out activities of daily living, which include basic self-care tasks like eating, bathing, dressing, and instrumental activities of daily living, which involve more complex tasks such as cooking and shopping. Joint pain, stiffness, fatigue related to arthritis can significantly affect an individual's ability to function, including for factors that can impact nutrition and dietary habits. For example, limit dexterity required for food preparation, opening cans, or the ability to stand while preparing food. And it's estimated that between 10 and 59% of people with arthritis experience difficulties with meal preparation, yet research directly examining this issue remains limited. We also know that impairments in daily tasks are oftentimes tied to both the number of painful joints and the severity of the pain. Now, difficulties with meal preparation, in particular, may play a key role in shaping a person's nutritional risk, so the risk of developing malnutrition. And this is consistent with other research showing that chronic musculoskeletal pain is associated with poor nutrition in older adults. And while pain is thought to be a central factor in arthritis-related disability, its direct connection to nutritional risk is not yet fully understood. Oh, not quite. And so why does this matter? Because malnutrition is linked to higher morbidity and mortality. So for example, a 2023 analysis using NHANES data found that malnutrition was prevalent among adults with arthritis, ranging between 19 and 27%, which the variability is explained by different diagnostic questionnaires. And they then linked that to an increase in all-cause mortality. The early detection of at-risk individuals may allow for timely interventions and better outcomes. And that's why nutritional risk screening tools have been developed to flag those vulnerable before malnutrition fully develops. But we still need more clarity on the role of functional impairment in the relationship between arthritis and nutritional risk, as it is impacted by both arthritis symptoms and nutritional status. Okay, next slide, please.
Thanks, Roxanne. So as Roxanne explained, because malnutrition has been linked to increased morbidity and mortality in older adults, the early detection of vulnerable individuals can allow for timely interventions and improved outcomes by allowing for some prevention. To help prevent progression to full-fledged malnutrition, screening tools have been designed to detect the presence of risk factors associated with poor nutritional status, also known as nutritional risk. The screening tool used for nutrition risk in the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging, or CLSA, is called the Seniors in the Community Risk Evaluation for Eating and Nutrition version 2, or SCREEN. Next slide, please. So our study objectives were to describe the association, firstly, between arthritis and nutritional risk, secondly, between arthritis and nutritional risk while considering meal preparation impairment, and thirdly, arthritis and nutritional risk while considering functional impairment. We used data from CLSA, a nationally representative cohort study with baseline data collected from 2010 to 2015 from over 50,000 Canadians between the ages of 45 and 85 years from all provinces, but excluding territories. Individuals who were in institutions or prisons or who lived on a reserve or who had cognitive impairment at baseline were not eligible to participate. The original CLSA study was approved by the CIHR Advisory Committee on Legal and Social Issues and the research boards at the study sites, and participants provided written informed consent. And for this secondary analysis, ethics approval was obtained from Concordia University. So the analysis includes data from both the tracking group, which was self-reported data during a telephone interview with 21,241 participants, and the comprehensive group, which included additional on-site measurements, tests, questionnaires, and in-home interviews for around 30,097 participants. Missing data was excluded from the analysis, so this included demographics like household income or the number of people living in the household or education. If any of those data were missing, these participants were excluded. And health measures like self-rated general health or mental health, and also if the nutrition risk or functional impairment measures were missing as well, those participants were excluded. So the final sample included in our analysis was 41,153. Our key exposure variable was arthritis, and this was a self-reported variable. Participants were asked if they had ever been told by a doctor that they had any of the following: osteoarthritis or OA of the knees, the hip, the hands, or rheumatoid arthritis or RA, or any other form of arthritis. Participants who did not know about a positive arthritis diagnosis, and this impacted 569 individuals, they were considered not to have arthritis, so they were treated conservatively. Thus, in both groups combined, tracking and comprehensive, there was 14,468 participants who were considered to have arthritis and 26,685 who were considered not to have arthritis. Among those with arthritis, people were additionally categorized into three non-mutually exclusive groups, with osteoarthritis with 10,485 participants, rheumatoid arthritis with 1,510 participants, and other forms of arthritis with 4,901 participants. And in addition to the self-reported arthritis, the comprehensive group also included validated disease ascertainment algorithms that determined the likelihood of OA of the hands, hips, and knees based on self-reported symptoms and clinical observations. So participants were categorized based on whether they responded affirmatively or negatively to experiencing symptoms such as joint enlargement and pain. And algorithms were only available for participants with osteoarthritis in the comprehensive group. So this is data only coming from 25,999 individuals. And the relationships between OA-related pain and nutrition were assessed in sensitivity analyses. And our key measure for an outcome was participants' nutritional risk score, which was measured using the Seniors in this Community Risk Evaluation for Eating and Nutrition 2 screen tool, and we use the abbreviated 8-item tool. This tool measures recent weight changes with a range of 0 to 8, and as for the next 3 categories of frequency of meal skipping, general appetite, and difficulties with swallowing. Daily vegetable and fruit consumption was measured with a scale of 0 to 4, and it was the same for the next 3 categories of daily fluid intake, the social context of mealtime, and the frequency of cooking meals at home, for a maximum score of 48. So the lower range of each item score represents greater nutritional risk. So for example, a weight loss of more than 4.5 kilograms in the last 6 months is scored as 0 in the category or question of recent weight changes, as is skipping meals each day for the next category, and so on and so forth for all of the responses. The greater the nutrition risk, the lower the score. And this means that overall, a lower screen 2 abbreviated score reflected higher nutritional risk. There's also a cutoff of what is called high nutritional risk scores, and it's denoted sometimes by H/NR. And this is defined as a score below 38, as this cutoff had optimal sensitivity and specificity in identifying nutritional risk when compared to a dietitian's clinical assessment, which includes medical and nutritional history, dietary intake, and anthropometric measurements, so taking height and weight and other measures. And then lastly, a key measure was impairment. And participants' functional impairment was measured using the Older Americans Resources and Services, or ORS, multidimensional functional assessment questionnaire. And this validated questionnaire includes items about 7 ADLs, or activities of daily living, such as dressing, eating, appearance upkeep, walking, bathing, getting in and out of bed, and using the bathroom, and 7 instrumental activities of daily living, those being meal preparation, using the telephone, traveling, shopping, housework, taking medication, and financial management. And for each of those different ADLs and IADLs, there's response options that include required no help, some help, or I was unable to perform without assistance. Because in this sample, few CLSA participants reported any functional impairment with ADLs or IADLs, the total ORS score was then used to categorize the respondents' overall functional capacity as dichotomous, so like a yes/no answer. So, and that being that either no help was required for any activity as the reference, versus yes versus some help, or a person was unable to perform at least one activity without assistance. And this approach was used similarly in a previous study. To isolate the effect of functional impairment as both an independent predictor and a covariate of interest, meal preparation impairment was considered separately from the other ADLs and IADLs in the ORS scale. So functional impairment was divided into 2 levels. The first looking exclusively at meal preparation impairment, and then secondly, impairment to any activity excluding meal preparation.
Okay, so as Théa went through all of our measures of interest, we assessed the association between having arthritis and nutritional risk score in a couple different ways. Our first way was as a continuous measure with lower scores indicating higher risk that were assessed in multiple linear regression. And as Théa mentioned, as a screen score of less than 38 is considered at high nutritional risk, we also assessed the likelihood of having high nutritional risk from a logistic regression. All of our analyses incorporated the survey weights, and because of our interest in meal preparation impairment and also functional impairment, we ran 3 separate sets of models. Our first model controlled for demographic characteristics such as age, sex, race, income, number of people in the household, and education, as well as controlling for measures of health such as BMI and the self-rated physical and mental health. The second model controlled for all of the same demographic characteristics and health measures, while also additionally controlling for whether the person indicated that they had some meal preparation impairment. And our third model additionally controlled for the demographic characteristics, health measures, and meal preparation impairment, as was controlled for in Model 2, while also controlling for whether the person indicated they had any general functional impairment, which excluded the meal preparation impairment. So as you recall, we have around 41,000 participants in our analysis, and of those 41,000, about 14,500 were people living with arthritis, and about 26,600 who did not. The demographic characteristics of participants with and without arthritis differed for all measured characteristics. For example, the sample who were living with arthritis were more likely to be female, about 60%. They were approximately 4 to 5 years older than people who did not have arthritis, and tended to have higher levels of household income as well as educational attainment. Approximately 38% of people living with arthritis were also considered to have high nutritional risk based on a screen score of less than 38. And this was significantly higher than the approximately 31% of people who were not living with arthritis who indicated that they were at high nutritional risk. People living with arthritis also had greater levels of meal preparation impairment, and approximately 13% had functional impairment compared to a little less than 5% for people who were living without arthritis. Participants living with arthritis were also more likely to have obesity compared to the participants who did not have arthritis. So as you remember, we ran these as 3 separate models. The first model controlled for just the demographic characteristics and health measures shown here at the bottom of the slide. And in our linear regression, we see that people living with arthritis have a nutritional risk score that it's about 4.4 units lower than people who do not have arthritis. In our second model, when we additionally controlled for whether the person also indicated that they had meal preparation impairment, we can see that those who had some form of meal preparation impairment had a nutritional risk score that was about 2.5 units lower than those who did not have any meal preparation impairment. And lastly, when we additionally controlled for functional impairment, we see that those who indicated that they had some general functional impairment, which excluded meal preparation impairment, their nutritional risk score was about 1.9 units lower than those who do not have any functional impairment. Notably, you'll notice that our beta estimates for the relationship between arthritis and nutritional risk score stayed relatively consistent, whether or not we controlled for meal preparation impairment or whether we additionally controlled for functional impairment. As Théa mentioned, we also assessed whether the person had a specific type of arthritis. So not just whether they self-reported that they had ever been told from a medical professional that they had arthritis, but we also looked into the different types that they had self-reported. And based on this, we see that the relationship between arthritis and nutritional risk score can differ based on the type of arthritis and the person self-reported. For instance, people with rheumatoid arthritis had a nutritional risk score that was a little bit more than 1 unit lower than those who did not have rheumatoid arthritis. These associations persisted when we also additionally controlled for functional impairment. And similar to what we saw on the previous slide, we again see that the relationship between a specific type of arthritis and the nutritional risk score is relatively consistent, whether we control for meal preparation impairment or whether we control for both meal preparation impairment and functional impairment. For the sake of space, we did not include that model 1, which only controlled for demographic characteristics and health measures, but the results were also consistent with this. We also assessed the likelihood that a person living with arthritis would be considered at high nutritional risk based on a screen score of less than 38. In our first model, which just controlled for demographic characteristics and health measures, we can see that those living with arthritis were about 14% more likely to be considered to have high nutritional risk. When we additionally control for meal preparation impairment, we see that those who indicated that they had some impairments with meal prep were about 1.8 times more likely to be considered at high nutritional risk. And when we additionally control for functional impairment, we see that those who indicated a general functional impairment, which excluded meal preparation impairment, they were about 1.6 times more likely to be considered at high nutritional risk. And similar to what we saw with the linear regression results, we again see that the odds ratios for the relationship between having arthritis and whether the person was considered at high nutritional risk stayed relatively consistent whether or not we controlled for just demographic characteristics and health measures, or whether we additionally controlled for meal preparation impairment, or additionally also functional impairment. Similar to what we did with the linear regression results, we also looked into the different types of arthritis and whether that would affect the likelihood of having high nutritional risk. And we see, similar to what we saw in the linear regression results, those with rheumatoid arthritis were at the highest risk for being considered to have high nutritional risk. It looks like it's about 40%. And these associations, again, were consistent whether or not we controlled for meal preparation impairment or also controlled for functional impairment. We also saw some evidence that functional impairment might be moderating the association between having arthritis and the nutritional risk score, or the likelihood of being considered high nutritional risk. We therefore stratified our models based on functional impairment. So among the larger group of people who did not have functional impairment, approximately 37,000 of the approximately 41,000 participants in the analysis, we are first looking at that group. For the sake of space, we're also including whether or not they self-report that they had any type of arthritis as a binary indicator in the same space as the different types of arthritis. However, the different types of arthritis were a separate model that was conducted separate from just did they have arthritis, yes versus no. And we can see that even among those with no functional impairment, the nutritional risk score is significantly lower, and that they are also significantly at greater risk for having high nutritional risk compared to those who do not have arthritis. Due to the smaller sample of people who have functional impairment, approximately 3,600, we can see that the precision is a lot lower. We have much wider confidence intervals, but the message is still the same. And in fact, we see that the association between having arthritis, whether it's any type of arthritis or it's a specific form of arthritis, and the nutritional risk score, or having been considered a high nutritional risk, that these relationships are somewhat more exacerbated in this group. So in particular, we can see that among people who have arthritis and functional impairment, their nutritional risk score is about 1 full unit lower than those who do not have arthritis, but have functional impairment. And these people are also about 30% more likely to be considered at high nutritional risk.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. So in this large representative sample of older Canadian adults, having any arthritis was associated with poorer nutrition risk scores, as Lisa went over, and also an increased likelihood of being at high nutrition risk. So both poor nutrition risk scores, like in our middle box, and then also increased likelihood for high nutrition risk, like in our right-hand box on this slide. The association for poor nutrition risk scores and high nutrition risk scores were strongest among those with rheumatoid arthritis. And this association was maintained after adjustment for meal preparation impairment and both general functional impairment. We also looked closely at how functional impairment affected the relationship between arthritis and nutritional risk. And we found that functional impairment partially mediated the relationship between arthritis and nutrition risk. And while having arthritis was associated with nutritional risk, the nutritional risk scores were poorer among people who had functional impairment as well. But what happens when someone has arthritis but does not have functional impairment? As Lisa showed with the models that stratified for functional impairment, they revealed that participants with arthritis were more likely to present lower screens 2 scores and were more likely to be at high nutritional risk, even in the absence of any functional impairment. So next slide, please. So our results are consistent with the literature that suggests links between arthritis and nutrition problems like poor diet quality, malnutrition, and food insecurity, which are dimensions of nutrition risk. Many of these nutrition problems have also been studied in terms of the other factors listed on the right-hand side on this slide, like pain, fatigue, and decreased food intake, among others. And there's some little arrows there to point those out. There you go. Thanks, Lisa. And however, most of the studies that have looked at those relationships between arthritis and these dimensions of nutrition risk and other impacts were inferred from smaller studies. And moreover, the use of the nutrition risk screening tool in CLSA offers a broader perspective of nutrition risk consolidated in one measure. Thus, we were able to study the relationship between nutrition risk and arthritis directly in a nationally representative sample. So next slide. So to summarize, the generalizability of past research has often been limited by small sample sizes and an emphasis on rheumatoid arthritis. In this large representative sample of older Canadian adults, having any arthritis was associated with poor nutritional risk scores and an increased likelihood of being at high nutritional risk, and the association was strongest among those with RA. This is the first study to investigate the association between arthritis and nutritional risk specifically. However, past research may provide important context for its findings, and some of these studies we listed for you here on the right. However, in these studies, the absence of participants without arthritis limited the interpretation of results for those who have arthritis but no functional impairment. And this is really important for prevention, to look at both people who have functional impairments, but also those who don't, to see what can be done to help prevent malnutrition. So we addressed the gap by looking at people who had arthritis with no functional impairment with a large representative sample encompassing both people with and without arthritis, and also those with and without functional impairment.
And so tying into the past research that's been done on the topic, I briefly wanted to touch on a previous study that was actually conducted as part of the Diet for Arthritis, or DART project. So today, the presentation was mainly on the quantitative component using the CLSA, but this project also included a qualitative component, which is a study that is titled on the slide. And through this study, we explored how arthritis-related disability impacts food behaviors. So we used focus groups in which participants highlighted barriers, as well as the importance of affordable, convenient, and trustworthy nutrition programs. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I wanted to very quickly touch on some of these findings, as they are complementary in a way to some of the findings we're presenting today. So we found that arthritis-related disability impacted every stage of food-related activities. So from food choices to food procurement to preparation, consumption, and then other lifestyle factors, all of these steps were disrupted. And across these different stages, participants consistently described barriers related to pain. So this included limited mobility, dexterity, or endurance. So to illustrate this, needing to use a cane, which made it impossible to carry 2 grocery bags, or eating less to reduce the burden on their joints in the hopes of reducing pain. That included fatigue as well. So that could reduce appetite, eating less nutritious, convenient foods, or having issues going to purchase foods. There was also a lot of issues surrounding knowledge that were flagged. So looking for nutrition information online, which we know a lot of people do, and a desire to know basic cooking strategies and easy recipes as a strategy to overcome these barriers. And lastly, social support, which included the availability of help and reliance on friends and family for doing things ranging from help with chopping to doing the groceries. And so despite these challenges, it was positive to note that some of our participants had already developed adaptive strategies. So that included modifying meals, using assistive tools, or seeking support. And the takeaway with this is that barriers are not related to one step. They cut across the entire food process and are influenced by so many other external individual factors. And so effective nutrition interventions for people with arthritis must therefore address both dietary guidance and the functional, social, and practical realities of living with arthritis. Next slide, please. And so just to quickly return to Théa's slide, and this was interesting that even with a relatively small sample, 27 people we had in our focus groups that had overall low levels of functional impairment and disability, our results identified each of these points. So greater pain and fatigue, decreased food intake, reduced access to food, and reliance on social support to cook or grocery shop. And so just to return back to our CLSA study, I'm going to quickly touch on some of the limitations that may reduce the applicability of the results. So firstly, all data were from the baseline wave of the CLSA, which was all that was available at the time, though follow-up, I believe, is ongoing. Secondly, the analytic sample was significantly different from the participants who were excluded from the analysis in both demographic and health characteristics, and thus the results can't necessarily be generalized to the entire CLSA sample. As the excluded participants were more likely to have arthritis and lower poor nutritional risk scores, this suggests that our results may actually underestimate their relationships. The use of self-reported data, and this is also generally true overall, that may be impacted by recall bias and social desirability bias. And lastly, although our study adjusted for age in all regression models, those with arthritis were approximately 4 years older than those without arthritis. And an older adult's increased susceptibility to poor nutrition status stems from numerous complex physiological changes that include altered metabolism. It can include cognitive decline or changing socioeconomic factors. And thus, a better understanding of the interactions between aging and functional impairment is also needed. So implications for practice and policy. Our paper illustrates that the relationships between nutrition risk and arthritis exist both with and without disability or functional impairment. And this means that people with arthritis could benefit from better nutrition support within the 8 domains of nutrition risk. And thus, health professionals should refer people living with arthritis to qualified health professionals, namely dietitians. Our results also indicate that disability impacts nutrition risk as a mediator, meaning that target functional impairment could help decrease nutrition risk, as it is part of the mechanism for increased nutrition risk. We also found that disability impacts nutrition risk as a moderator, which means that someone with arthritis and disability would have a higher chance of increased and worsening nutrition risk. And this could be because nutrition risk, which includes a wide range of considerations, so skipping meals, weight change. It could be because nutrition risk may aggravate certain symptoms that can contribute to functional decline. And this means that people living with arthritis and disability could benefit from multidisciplinary support that addresses both nutrition risk and functional decline. And lastly, policies are needed to enhance access to these types of supports. So that can range from insurance coverage to certain services to eligibility for disability, a variety of adapted programs, and so on. Next slide, please. And lastly, to conclude, the results of the study presented today highlight the presence of an association between arthritis and poor nutritional risk scores and higher nutritional risk in a nationally representative sample of Canadian adults between the ages of 45 and 85. There is increasing evidence indicating that the relationship between nutrition and arthritis is multifactorial, likely caused by complex interactions between physical, psychological, social, financial, and environmental factors. And lastly, more research is needed to understand these relationships. More research is needed to understand the relationship between arthritis and nutrition in specific groups to inform adapted preventative interventions and to improve clinical practices.
Great. Thank you so much for your excellent presentation. I'd now like to open it up for questions. Just a reminder, muting will remain on, but you can enter your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom window. So rather than the chat, please put your questions in the Q&A box. So to get us started, our first question comes from Barry, who says, from overusing my hands occupationally, I begin to have arthritic hands. What can I do in my later years as I cannot stop using my hands? So from an individual point of view, what can the individual do?
Well, I guess I can I mean, I'm by no means an expert, and perhaps Théa or Lisa can weigh in. This actually kind of touches a bit more, I think, on the work we did in our qualitative study, where we got to touch on these elements a little bit more and have more of a personal approach to them. And that was discussed a lot, that a lot of the joints that are impacted by arthritis are key for just a variety of daily activities. And so there was the use of adaptive strategies, as I mentioned. So people had special tools that were designed for arthritis. They also had consulted a variety of professionals to develop strategies. Once again, it could be a dietitian for everything that's kind of surrounds nutrition, but a lot of people were followed by other medical professionals to help support them in the other facets that may be impacted by arthritis.
Yeah, and I can add to that as well that that many participants also mentioned just like changing some of their habits in terms of to reduce chopping, to reduce amounts that they would carry. So maybe doing smaller loads of carrying groceries at a time, or going more often. And buying pre-chopped items, and so like to reduce the amount of time that they would spend chopping, or having like a stool or a chair if they were going to be standing to prepare food, so that helped reduce their fatigue and pain as well. So those types of strategies can help reduce like wear and tear, and give some endurance as well to continue doing some meal prep, but without having the accompanying pain, or reducing a bit.
Thank you. Next question. I was on mute. So Godfred says, great presentation. Did you adjust for the province of residence? How much does the province a person lives in affect their nutritional risk?
I can speak to the analysis portion. We did not, unfortunately, control for province. I think Théa and Roxanne are probably better equipped to answer how much the province you live in can affect your nutritional risk. I would imagine the not just environment, but also your habits also be quite different.
Yeah, well, like we didn't look at those aspects, but it's a very interesting question. I can't speak specifically in terms of diet quality by province, but I do know that there's been results looking at food security. So like a person's access to food, and the availability and stability of being able to access food, and also income. And there are differences depending on where you live in Canada, and according to other socio-demographic factors as well. So depending on where you are, some aspects for food security might be different, because there could be some more social supports in some provinces versus others, and also that can also vary a lot depending if you're in a more urban area versus rural, like your access to transport, and like your proximity to social support. So if you're alone, or if you have like other family members around you. So it's like multifactorial, as Roxanne mentioned. And but that's a really interesting idea, like especially to look at then policies and implications and how that could play into nutrition risk. So thank you.
Great, thank you. There's still some time to get in some last questions. Okay, one just came through. So yeah, keep them coming. This is a comment from Arlene. I think the type of arthritis a person has is significant to carry and prepare food. Hand arthritis affects my grip. This is very difficult in food preparation.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that's something, once again, going back to the focus groups that when we really got to discuss these issues with people who had arthritis, where which joints are impacted, the severity of the disease are all really important factors in that can influence someone's risk of functional impairment, but also the risk of, well, their nutrition risk. So those are really important considerations. And once again, it's arthritis being so diverse is so highly, needs to be so highly, the treatment needs to be so highly personalized as well. And your comment really highlights that.
Thanks. I have a question for Théa and Roxanne. As dietitians, how has this project and the findings from this project changed your personal practice, like in your positions outside of academia? How has this changed how you operate?
I can go first. Well, this project at first brought changes to, at the time I was working at Concordia at their Perform Center or School of Health, and so it was helpful for just for making sure that cooking workshops were suitable for people who had various needs and ranges in functional capacity. So it was helpful to kind of test run with participants and get their feedback on what kind of tools could be useful, and also like having supports like chairs available and whatnot. So it made an immediate impact, in that we got to test that in some cooking workshops and get feedback from participants, and then with participants as part of other projects. When we were working at Concordia with the School of Health, we had a program that was funded by the Webster Foundation with older adults from across the city of Montreal. Well, then a lot of the same kinds of issues or came up as well. So and even with athletes who are doing repeated wear and tear and injuries, so it really informed like a lot of what we got to do at Concordia in terms of offering services to the community. And so I think I carry those lessons with me in forward in what I do as a nutritionist, even though I'm no longer doing that right now at this moment. So
in my case, so Théa was actually my supervisor, and this was part of my master's. This is a continuation of my master's project. So I was very green, and I think getting the chance to interact with people and discuss with people, once again, I think really highlighted the need for inclusivity, and that can mean so many different things because the faces of arthritis were so diverse. We would have people in their 30s, people in their 70s, all with completely unique stories and kind of unique considerations. It also definitely opens your eyes to, when I illustrated kind of all the steps involved in nutrition. So from choosing what you're going to eat to preparing it to buy, all of them were impacted in very unique ways. So that definitely stuck with me, I think, on a personal level. And in terms of how it's carried over. And I also don't work in a client-facing capacity. But one thing that really stood out to me as well was the need for evidence-based accessible nutrition information and resources, because a lot of comments we got were just being discouraged at the lack of evidence-based information, not knowing where to turn to. And I think as a dietitian, I can really speak to the fact that evidence-based information is not accessible, and that should definitely be made more accessible, because there's a lot of false information out there that doesn't necessarily serve altruistic purposes. And that, I think, was a really big.
Go ahead, Théa.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add then, like working with Lisa, like with her knowledge, to look at this then in a nationally representative sample, and to actually then see like the evidence, like in testing the different models, it's very validating, because it's what a lot of participants were like sharing with us, both in the focus groups and then before, as we were designing the project, like working with dietitians who had worked with people with arthritis for years, but they were like, their common concern was just that like there's not always evidence saying that people with arthritis have nutrition risks, like it's hard to have referrals and then to get coverage. And so I think our hope is that this work, and that this is a good contribution towards evidence-based need for nutrition support and multidimensional support for people living with arthritis.
Thank you. We have a question from Olive. What preventative tips can you offer?
Well, I like we mentioned to Barry, with like the hands, and what participants shared with us is like making sure that you have some adaptive strategies to reduce kind of ongoing wear and tear, which could increase pain and fatigue. So if it means getting like pre-chopped items, or finding ways so you're not standing as long during meal prep, reducing the amount that you might carry if you're getting groceries. So all of those little things will help conserve energy, and can like not reduce pain, but not help pain build up like throughout the day. So those could be some adaptive strategies. And then in terms of nutrition and like dietary advice, of course, like every person is not just only someone with arthritis, but has a host of other factors about themselves as well. So nutrition support from like a registered dietitian who could take into account everything that is important. So your medical history and family history, your current life practices, so that they can provide some tailored recommendations for you that could work in your day-to-day would be helpful. We could also say that there's pretty strong evidence that a diet that is very colorful, like full of whole grains and fruits and vegetables, is likely to have a lot higher amounts of various vitamins and minerals, and to reduce inflammation. And so following those types of dietary habits can also be beneficial for everybody. I mean, we don't always attain those recommendations whether you're living with or without arthritis, but it's a great place to start.
Great, thank you. So I know we're at time. I'll just slip in one last question that I think relates. So from Linda and then from Roberta. So Linda's asking about the impact of SES, and I think you alluded to that with the pre-chopped vegetables. She says someone with a more severe disability would probably have a lower SES, which might impact the ability to adapt, because pre-chopped vegetables cost more. And then Roberta's question was about, did you look at pain? And how that might impact and which scale you might use. So to put them together, did you look at SES, and then did you look at pain in your models?
Well, we did adjust for socio-demographic variables to control for that. And so, and like over and above people's levels of income or various other factors, arthritis remained important for worse nutritional risk scores and higher likelihood of high nutrition risk. Although, as Lisa explained, the sample within the sample of participants, the participants with arthritis did have lower income than the participants who didn't have any arthritis at all. So that is a concern, because often one feeds into the other, in that, like, if you have more pain and fatigue, it's going to be harder to have an income. So I said pre-chopped vegetables, but our participants and our focus groups also mentioned the importance of social support and people who would help them with meal prep for chopping vegetables as well, or for other meal prep items. Tasks related with that. So, but then we get into also that not everybody has social support very close either. So it is a challenge, and I don't have any like ready-made solutions for that. But then again, we get back to our policy and practice implications, where it's very important to look at people's access to those other types of support that could help make living with arthritis and reducing nutrition risk manageable. Oh, pain, sorry. Yeah, and then the pain. So that Lisa looked at with insensitivity analyses with just participants with OA. So we mentioned like that disease ascertainment algorithm, lots of big words. So, but what that means in terms of the context of CLSA is that it's kind of like a little schematic like this, where participants were asked, okay, is there are the joints and this is just for the hand, are they enlarged? No, yes. And they followed like the decision tree all the way through to ascertain, okay, there's like a diagnosis of mild or severe OA of the hand. And so then participants who got an affirmative response after answering all of these questions throughout this tree were classified as having OA. And then also there was other questions then that asked more specifically about pain. And so those were addressed then in sensitivity analyses. And I believe then there was if people had both OA and more pain, there was more like poor risk scores and also higher risk of being at high nutrition risk as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much for your excellent presentation. And thank you to our attendees. We appreciate your participation. So I'd like to remind everyone that the next deadline for data access applications is October 1st, 2025. Please visit the data access section on our website to review available data, as well as additional details about the application process. Also, a friendly reminder for all CLSA data users to keep us updated on any changes that affect your data access agreements. So if you've moved institutions or your team has changed, trainee has graduated or moved on, just reach out to us at access@clsa-elcv.ca with any questions or updates. And please complete the anonymous survey when you exit the Zoom session. Our next webinar is titled Socio-Demographic Determinants of Mobility Decline Among Community Dwelling Older Adults, Preliminary Findings from the CLSA. And this will be presented on Monday, October 20th, 2025 at 1 p.m. Eastern by Ogochukwu Onyeso a population health researcher from the University of Lethbridge. So the registration details are posted on our website and in the chat box. Thanks again. Have a great day.